Today we're looking at assessing reading. You've already seen assessing listening and assessing speaking, and today you have the great privilege of not having to see my face as you watch the video, because it's not necessary. I have nothing special to show you. So today, looking at assessing reading, the chapter from Brown works in the same way as the other two chapters, where we're going to describe the different types of assessing reading and give examples of each of those that you can then use when designing your own tests. And as testing is really the same as classroom activities, you can also use them for types of classroom activities. The basic types of reading then are, if we think about the real world, academic reading, where we have to read articles, reference material, essays, etc. That's kind of what's going on with you guys right now. Job-related reading, like messages, letters, schedules, manuals, and reports, which you also have a bit of that going on here at the university and with your practice centers, especially emails, right? Grades, things like that. And personal reading, which you probably all don't do enough of, but if you look at the examples here, I'm sure you do some of it. Newspapers, recipes, advertisements, novels, jokes, forms, financial documents, etc. So that gives you an idea of the genres that we read in, and I hope that gives you some ideas already of reading activities you can do with your class, that it's not all just read the story or read the dialogue and circle the correct answer. We can read advertisements, recipes, financial documents. It might sound crazy, but that might be a really practical activity to do with high school students. So the first type of reading performance that we have is called perceptive reading. Careful with all these terms, it gets really confusing as some of their names mean different things in speaking or listening or reading. Perceptive reading. This means attending to the components of larger stretches of discourse, focusing on letters, words, punctuation, etc. So basically, here we're talking about bottom-up reading, looking at the details first. At a word level, probably, can be associated with an image or associated with, if we associate it with other text, that will be selective, which you'll see here soon. So here's an example. The test takers read, led, let, and they circle S for the same and D for different. This is very similar to the intensive listening activities that you saw in one of the previous videos, but now they're reading it. Here's some other examples of perceptive reading. The test takers here point to the word that you read here. So they read cat and they point to the cat. They read clock and they point to the clock. They read chair and they point to the chair. Clearly this would be more of a one-on-one type of assessment. This is really helpful in preschool. If any of you end up working in preschool, this is a very typical preschool type of evaluation. Or here, the examples at the bottom. The test takers read, the pencils are under the table. False, because the pencils are on the table. The cat's on the table. False, it's under the table. The picture is over the couch. True. And that one's a little bit more advanced, but same kind of concept. Other examples of perceptive reading. Again, we're matching with pictures. So here it says picture cued, matching words with identification. The test takers read clock, and they have to put a 1 in the picture next to the clock, or tick the ones that they hear. The test takers here point to the part of the picture that you read about here. So they see the picture and they read the man is reading the book, they point to him, or the cat is under the table and they point to that. So always associating language, brief words or sentences with images. One more example. Here we have another picture cued. It says rectangle and they have to choose the right one. So reading at a word level, just even vocabulary exercises that a lot of you do would be perceptive reading. Selective reading is the one that we do the most. Here you can see the definition, reading recognition of short lengths of text using bottom-up and top-down strategies. And here we're usually focusing on vocabulary and grammar, and we work with definitions and word and context. So like deduction, rather than matching with pictures, we match with definitions, or good old fill in the blank, right? But with focus on grammar and comprehending a specific word. So he's not married, he is single. How do I know that? Because the definition is he's not married, and therefore I'm able to fill in the blank. So it's a specific type of fill in the blank, not any fill in the blank fits with selective. Here it has to be focused on grammar or vocabulary, and that from the context I can figure out the answer. Another example, do you like champagne? No, I can't stand it. I had to have been able to understand, do you like champagne, in order to be able to answer it. Of course, there's some comprehension here also of vocabulary, which has a lot to do with reading. Here's a multiple choice closed vocabulary grammar task where they have to fill in the correct preposition based on the context they're reading. So activities that get a little bit more complex, but it's still focused on grammar, so they don't necessarily have to comprehend everything. They need to comprehend the use of these prepositions. More selective tasks. Write in the letter of the definition on the right that matches the word on the left. So we're matching synonyms here, but again, just with text, no pictures. And here we have a selected response, fill in the vocabulary task, similar to the ones you saw before. From the definition of the sentence or deduction, they can fill in the blank. Multiple choice grammar editing task. Here they're supposed to choose the letter of the underlined word that is not correct. So here we have the abrasively action of the wind wears away softer layers of rock. They don't really even necessarily need to understand that sentence. They do need to understand forms of speech, and that abrasively would be incorrect because it is describing a noun, not describing a verb. So we need an adjective, not an adverb, so it shouldn't have ly in that first sentence. So we're focusing on grammar in this case. Multiple choice picture cued responses. Here it says, during at least 3/4 of the year, the Arctic is frozen. And they have to choose the correct picture that represents that. Labeling, this is still selective, but there's more language and vocabulary involved than in the perceptive tasks. Labeling the parts of the bicycle here with the picture. Sentence completion could also be selective and not necessarily one correct answer, but it has to make sense within the structure. It is best to stay home, and if you have a fever, you should, for example. Completing those measures their reading comprehension. Now, important in this, when I grade it, if my objective is to check their selective reading skills, if they misspell it or their grammar is incorrect when they answer, so long as it's obvious they understood what the beginning of that sentence said, then they would get the point because we're checking reading here. So be careful with that. Interactive reading. This is the third kind. We've seen perceptive, selective, and now interactive. Interactive reading are longer stretches of text from a paragraph to several pages, negotiating meaning using prior knowledge or your own schemata. For example, Cloze Tests, but here we're talking about like random words, so comprehending the whole text, not a specific type of vocabulary or a specific type of grammar. So we have two different types of cloze tests or ways that we can create cloze tests. One is a fixed ratio deletion, so I'm not looking at any specific type of word, it's just every 7th or every 5th. And another type is rational deletion, and this one is when I select words based on their grammatical function. To score a cloze test, I can grade based on if they put the exact word that I was looking for. That's clearly more practical because it's either right or wrong. Or I could grade related upon an appropriate word that fits grammatically but maybe isn't the right word, giving partial points or even the whole point depending upon what the objective of my activity is. But that takes longer to assess because as students put different answers, I'll have to read around the context and know English well enough to realize if it could work or not. Some examples of cloze exercises. The first one is with a rational deletion where only prepositions and conjunctions have been deleted. And this other example, maybe you haven't seen this one before, is a C test. It's a type of cloze exercise where they have to complete the word. So only half of the word is missing. So it makes it a little bit easier and guides them to the exact word we're looking for. So there's no ambiguity. A cloze allied is when I have to find the incorrect words. This is a slightly different type of cloze exercise. They have to read through it and circle all the words that are incorrect. Impromptu reading. Here's the good old read and answer the questions. This is what, about all the other examples, maybe you've never done them before or seen very few. In schools, at least, I mean, it's possible, I suppose, that you've taken them on your own standardized tests. But what we mostly see at schools are read and answer the questions, which are impromptu reading. I'm not going to read that passage, but very clearly similar to things that we do at schools. They have to read it and answer the questions. which are all about different sub-skills. In any case, they're not necessarily all specific information. If you look at number 1, it's the main idea, the topic of the passage. Number 2 is deduction. In number 3, inference. So here they're working with all the sub-skills in this impromptu reading. Which, if you leads me to this next possible exercise, a good activity for you to work on your sub-skills would have you to go back in the video a second and look specifically through there to see which sub-skills are being used in each question, because in that last activity I just showed you, there are questions asking for the main idea, expressions, inferences, grammar, looking for specific information, excluding facts, things that are not stated, and so on and so forth. So that would be a good thing to practice. Here's another example of impromptu reading with open-ended questions. This again is something we do quite frequently. What do you think the main idea of the passage is? What would you infer? Open questions, and students answer. Again, remember, we're not going to grade how they answer so long as it makes sense with what was read, because we're checking their reading skills. Other impromptu reading activities we could do: editing and proofreading through an entire text, putting the story in order, scanning for specific information, or information transfer where we have them read and complete a chart or map or graph. As you can see, impromptu reading is mostly what we do in schools. Here are some other examples of reading for interpreting graphic information. So here the students are looking at a graphic, they're looking at an image, and they have to answer questions about it. The last type of reading we're going to discuss today is extensive reading. This is text of more than one page, usually read outside of the classroom, but if they're being assessed, like it says here, clearly not completely out of the classroom, and generally we're assessing for the gist or the main idea. So reading a novel outside the classroom, typical in schools now are these plan lector, where they have to read a book at home, and at school they're assessed, or they read it a little bit at a time in class even. And it's kind of a quasi-extensive reading, because generally extensive reading is for pleasure, but if we're assessing it here, then not as much. Some of the tasks are the same as interactive reading. This is because when we assess extensive reading, it inevitably becomes interactive. So things like short answer tasks, editing, scanning, ordering, all the things that we were just talking about. Some other examples. I'm not going to stop and read them. You can see here in class we could work with holistic rubrics of their reading skills. Outlining could also be extensive reading. If it's a test, I can score a little bit more tediously, but in class activities, things like this holistic scale would be the most helpful. These are some examples that we could work with in class. And in class, we're going to be working with the material that I sent you about assessing reading, and we'll continue practicing with these different types of activities.